It's great to be here and see all of you, and hi to our Zoom audience as well, even though I can't see you. Richard and I had a few people that we wanted to thank before we get started, and I just want to say a special thank you to Liz and the museum for giving us the opportunity to do this, and everyone at the museum who helped us with research, David, Beth, Rebecca, and Armando Trejo from the ECC archives. We pestered him a lot with our research, and many others who we talked to that were generous with their time and information. We thank all of you. A special shout out goes to Jack Weiss, the retired dean of ECC, for sharing a wonderful bunch of information related to research that was done for this book, which was the 60th anniversary book at ECC. And that got us started on the right track. So our story today is about the early history of ECC and also how Gil Renner, the first president, and Dean Chipman, the first vice president, helped develop the college. From the early days, ECC endeavored to respond to both the cultural needs of the community and the educational needs. This connection with the arts is also an important theme of our program. We acknowledge that there were many who could rightfully claim the designation of founding father or founding mother, but we will try to highlight some of those in our presentation. ECC has a rich and well-documented history, and we hope to build on that with our presentation, and we hope you enjoy. For those of you, it's not advancing. For those of you that don't know a whole lot about ECC, but I bet you a lot of you in here know tons about ECC, here's a little background. Great. There are two eras that correspond to the different educational systems that ECC has functioned in. In 1949, ECC was created as a division of U46. And in 1966, it joined the newly created Illinois Junior College system as District 509. Our main focus will be on the U46 era and the transition to the District 509 era up to about the mid to late 70s. Next, I will introduce our fathers. Gil Renner led the college from 1950 to 1971. He served as dean of the college during the U46 era and then as the first president in the District 509 era. Therefore, we can say that in his 21 years at ECC, Gil served as a founding father twice. He was active in leadership roles in the Illinois Association of Junior Colleges and also served with a team of educators that helped create the statewide system, making him uniquely qualified to lead the transition into the 509 era. Dean Chipman was hired in 1963 to direct the adult education division. From the beginning and throughout his tenure, his official duties also included promoting cultural offerings of the college and managing the Elgin Symphony Orchestra. When ECC joined the Illinois State Junior College system in 1966, Dean was named Dean of Instruction. Yes, he was now Dean, which was often a source of amusement for him and confusion for others. In 1970, he was named Vice President of Instruction and Administration, and he was the first to serve in that role. He retired in 1973 and continued to be associated with the college until 1980. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Richard to talk about early history and his father.
Really doing the piano. How's that? Well, ECC was founded in 1949 as a two-year community college. And there are a lot of observers who believe that the two-year community college was probably the greatest innovation in American higher education in the 20th century. But really from its beginning, there's been kind of a controversy over exactly what the role of this innovation should be. And initially, these schools were seen as just providing the first 2 years of a higher education, which then you would transfer over to another school. And the popular name for that kind of school was a junior college. And America's first public junior college was established not too far from here, over in Joliet High School in 1901. And that's the high school, not the prison. But it is the first public junior high school in America. Well, by the 1920s, leaders were calling on these kinds of schools to do more. And before World War II, particularly in California, schools were beginning to offer vocational training and even cultural initiatives. And I have a picture here of a gentleman, Archibald Cloud, who was the president of San Francisco Junior College and a leader in these kinds of activities, and indeed is credited with coining the term community college. Well, Elgin wasn't on the sidelines in these matters, and Elgin had its own junior college as early as 1914, but it was a private affair, and it was located just around here, a joint endeavor between the Elgin Academy and Northwestern University, and it existed primarily to give students the first 2 years of higher education, which then they could transfer over to Northwestern or elsewhere. But these years were also the progressive era in America, 1914, that period. And it was an era of really intense public reform. And in Elgin, they were really embracing a broader role for public education. And so if you look at the 1916 Elgin High yearbook, for example, they prominently display the relatively new Elgin High logo with the promise, education for all. And in that yearbook, this is quite remarkable. Elgin High's principal, William Goebel, provided a remarkable vision of that promise. Essentially, he was proposing in the yearbook an offer to make a junior college transfer program in his high school. It was incredible. And as he said, who's going to be the first to ask to be enrolled here as a college student? Well, years of financial instability and legal uncertainties, overcrowded facilities postponed a formal public junior college in Elgin. But by 1941, the school board appeared ready to open a 2-year junior college in the high school as early as the fall of 1942. But as you know, a little thing called Pearl Harbor intervened. Put that on the back burner. But Americans who emerged from the war, particularly like these young people celebrating the end of the war down in Douglas Avenue on VJ Day, really emerged from the war looking for a much better life after years of depression and worldwide strife. And many of them saw access to higher education as really a key to what their dreams were going to be. Now, of course, the GI Bill of Rights and state versions drastically expanded access to higher education for returning veterans. And as a result, in early 1946, the University of Illinois found itself facing an enrollment of 23,000 students with space for 15,000. Not a good situation. So in the spring of 1946, Elgin High's principal, Roscoe Rocky Cartwright, outstanding principal, was among a group of leaders who were gathering to try to find a solution to this problem for the university. And they came up with the idea that the university would open extension centers in select high schools around the state where students could take the first year of university education and then transfer it down to Champaign. And Elgin was one of those selected schools. And so in the fall of 1946, the extension program opened under Cartwright's direction in the high school. And here you have a picture of students registering in the summer there of 1946. With some of the top brass of the high school helping them over there. Coach John Kraft, Rocky Cartwright's in the background, getting them registered. Had about 150 students taught by Elgin High faculty, including my father. At the same time, the school board opened an adult education program under Assistant Superintendent Marvin Berge. And that program in the high school was intended for returning veterans seeking a trade school experience. And here you have a picture of Berge and a group of local and Veterans Administration leaders on a kind of a hot night in August, it looks like, but talking over the plans for this new program. Well, by 1948, changes were coming. Number one, the extension had pretty much solved the university's over-enrollment problems, and those things were being wound up, although Elgin kept the extension for a third year. But at the same time, Elgin was dusting off its plans to revive a two-year junior college in the high school. And so, but at the same time, something else had changed, because the model for a two-year college had changed from being an institution which would simply provide those first 2 years of education, which then you could transfer over, to an institution which was intended to serve the entire community's educational needs after high school. And so the new model had been a major recommendation of a national commission, which had been assembled by President Truman to address America's educational challenges. And the Truman Commission's highly publicized report in December of 1947 said that you should call these things community colleges. That was the term that they wanted to use, because they should expand educational opportunity for the entire community. And Illinois educational leaders agreed. In 1948, they said such colleges should be community institutions. And they specifically said these colleges should be the principal cultural centers of their communities. Well, this was the most progressive thinking of the time concerning education and community colleges, and Elgin totally embraced it when his school board gathered to take action on January 10th, 1949. And that night, the U46 school board unanimously approved a proposal which would combine the university's extension program with the high school's adult education program into a new division called the Community College. So all of you have, just to be clear here, the real name is not Elgin Community College, it's the Community College. They were very proud of that. In any event, many accounts of ECC's history emphasize its origins in the University of Illinois Extension program. But it's notable that its roots are in both that program and, just as importantly for our talk today, in a community-oriented adult education program. Because after a generation of dreaming, Elgin had finally made an institutional commitment to education for all. Well, the school board hired Charles Evans, an education professor from Mississippi State University, to be the college's leader. And with his hard work, the college opened on September 12th, 1949, in Elgin High School, largely with high school faculty. And it was front page news on the Courier. And here you have a photograph of the registration of an ECC student, Lois Eaton. Now, it's notable that the first featured ECC student was part of a community vocational program. Lois would take her academic classes at the college while she would be enrolled in a 3-year program at Sherman's nursing school. And local newspaper columnist Gunn Clifford lauded the partnership of these two community enterprises, ECC and Sherman Hospital, saying that they were really keeping with their theme of service to the community. Now, ECC started with about 65 day students and about 35 young women like Lois Eaton in the nursing program. And it was a good time to start the college. Elgin was prosperous, and strong leadership was directing Elgin schools into a period of excellence and absolutely breathtaking expansion. And the Chicago News article at the time described Elgin as like a postcard, a piece of New England. It said, neat and attractive, no slums, and 92% of the families own their own homes. Moreover, it emphasized the fact that Elgin was a school-conscious city. And there's one ECC historian who ascribes that consciousness to the influence of the watch factory, its New England character, and moreover, the modern expression of the Puritan commitment to universal compulsory public education. Well, I don't know about that, but years later, when my father was describing the community to state officials, he said it was not wealthy, but it had solid people who sacrificed to develop excellent educational opportunities for their families. Now, the citizens seemed happy with their new college. And in May 1950, the Courier said the college was forging ahead largely by the hard work of Dean Evans. But after only 1 year, Charles Evans resigned to take a position at the University of Arkansas. And on July 1st, 1950, my father assumed the leadership of Elgin Community College. And I had to study up a little bit on his new job. Now, historians have noted that the early leaders of the junior college movement were typically men of small town Protestant backgrounds and modest social origins. My father certainly fit that mold. He had a very modest rural upbringing in Illinois, and his parents sacrificed to see that he could get a college degree and start a teaching career. Of course, he had no career roadmap leading to the presidency of the community college, but if there was nothing yet in the 1920s that was called a community college, probably a good way to prepare for a career building one would be to connect to a community. So in the summer of 1929, he made his first Elgin connection when he brought a group of Peoria boys to the Elgin YMCA's new summer camp, Camp Edwards in Wisconsin. And he impressed the camp's director, Mr. Micklewright, the leader of the Elgin YMCA, and was invited to remain that year to come back in 1930. Now, Micklewright also, in my father's words, twisted his arm to apply for a teaching job in Elgin. And when Elgin High had an opening on the science faculty in the spring of 1931, my father hitchhiked up here for an interview and was selected. And he would teach and coach at Elgin High for 19 years, becoming the head of the science department. He was particularly enthusiastic sponsoring the Girls Science Club. Looks like there's several years he was doing that. But in any event, he had a great career at Elgin High. But when he assumed ECC's leadership, he lacked Charles Evans' background in higher education. There's no question about that. But he brought a network of community relationships which had served him and the college very well. And the network included many members of the Elgin High faculty who were both personal friends but would be teachers at ECC. And his relationships with the First Congregational Church, the YMCA, and the Rotary Club. And additionally, he had lifelong bonds with school superintendent Orrin Thompson and with high school principal Rocky Cartwright. And of course, his fundamental relationship, his marriage to my mother and her acquaintances, his acquaintances through her, with her friends from the YWCA and her own teaching career. Now, in a 1991 interview, my father said he stumbled upon the concept of the community college. And I don't know exactly when that stumbling began, but on the other hand, I do have a copy of a classic 1945 book on Illinois junior colleges, which belonged to him. And I know he was on the extension faculty in 1946, and he was on the first ECC faculty in 1949 as head of the science department. By joining the community college movement, he knew he was part of a real change. And he once said that colleges have never been the same since 1946. Because older people, married people, and working people want an education. And he was determined to offer it to them. And in 1952, he defined ECC's mission as finding the occupational and cultural needs of the community and offering courses to meet them. Now, when ECC set up, or when ECC was established by the school board, they said it would offer courses if 12 residents were interested in them. My father said 10 would be enough. In any event, it was likely no coincidence that one of the first speakers invited to address ECC's faculty was a fellow named Jesse Bogue, who was both a leader and truly an evangelist for the concept of community colleges, and author of the first book to have community college in this, the term community college in its title. My father also worked to get a better academic perspective on community colleges, taking college courses, particularly at the University of Southern California. And so as a consequence, his California snapshots at the time often had me standing by some new community college building out there as he recorded ideas for the campus that he was hoping he would be building someday. Well, his first year at ECC must have been a special challenge because he was the only member of the administration and staff. In August 1951, he was joined by Kathleen Yeast, and she was initially hired as a secretary, but she very soon was promoted to registrar and assistant director of the evening school. Now, Miss Yeast's background shows a long string of perfect attendance records in grade school and a Phi Beta Kappa key from Grinnell, so she definitely has some academic enthusiasms. But on the other hand, her first career had been in advertising in Chicago, where she'd been particularly active in the Women's Advertising Club there, before moving to Elgin and more advertising work in the 1940s. Once at ECC, she was quick to get a foundation for her new job. She took a summer course at Yale in 1952 on junior colleges, and then for many summers, she took courses at the University of Chicago under Cyril Houle, who was a leading scholar in adult education at the university. Now, my father and Miss Yeast were soon joined by a third employee, and that's Erica Tamara Varick. Erica was a native of Estonia who had lost her husband into Siberia when Estonia was crushed between Germany and the Soviets. In 1949, she arrived in Elgin with her young son from a displaced persons camp, and speaking virtually no English. But she was a remarkable worker, and she apparently caught the notice of School Superintendent Warren Thompson, who suggested she apply for a job over at ECC. So she became my father's secretary, and she would be the third member of the team, which would serve as ECC's administration for the next 10 years. Now, the appointment of Miss Yeast as an administrator focused on adult education really seemed to jumpstart that program. And ECC's curriculum really was composed in those days of two separate parts. One was the curriculum for the day students who were generally intending to transfer, and that curriculum was largely set by the colleges and universities that they wanted to transfer to. But it was through the adult education program that ECC would really perform as a community college, because it was through that program that it was responding to the unique educational needs of Elgin. In 1951, Elgin's adult education was being offered by several local organizations, such as Gail Borden, the Academy, the YWCA. But ECC soon stepped into the lead, and in the fall of 1951, they offered 19 evening courses for about 300 students. Now, generally the most popular courses, and they would do surveys on this, generally the most popular courses were ones concerning job advancement. But the program was definitely adapted to Elgin's unique conditions. For example, if Elgin had an observatory, it had a course in astronomy. And if Elgin had a major state mental health hospital, it had courses on mental health taught by members of the hospital staff. And if U46 had Illinois' first FM radio station, owned and operated by a public school, WEPS, of course, it would offer a course in radio broadcasting. Well, the program also included serious cultural initiatives, which Dan will discuss in detail, in addition to classes in photography, painting, ceramics, design. And when Elgin wanted to learn more about landscape gardening, ECC went out and they offered a course given by Mr. Harold Klopp, a prominent landscape architect in Chicago who designed every year the Chicago Flower and Garden Show. And apparently Elgin impressed Klopp so much, he featured an Elgin home here in one of his articles in Popular Mechanics in 1959. Anybody recognize that? I think that's over on Wink Park Boulevard. Yeah, I thought so. Well, anyway, naturally, there were courses too at this period responding to all the challenges of life in the 1950s, like how do you manage your hi-fi? And how do you improve your home movies? And how do you play an electric organ? Things like that. But at the same time, the college was very flexible here. If it was difficult for students to attend at the college would bring courses to the students. And here's a picture of Ron Cook, member of the science faculty at the college, teaching a refresher course in chemistry at the watch factory in 1955. Well, for new courses, it looks like my father followed a rule of 10. If at least 10 people would enroll in the course, he would offer a 10-week course for $10 a credit hour. And this seemed to be popular because each semester seemed to offer headlines of record enrollments. We started out, as you remember, with 300 in 1951. Here we're at 2,100 in 1956. And as early as 1952, there were waiting lists for some of these courses. Well, by 1959, the course numbers had grown from 19 to 90. And these included apprentice training for electricians and carpenters and plumbers. But remember Lois Eaton. She was involved in a vocational program that would lead directly to a job. And by the late 1950s, ECC was not offering programs like that anymore. There were no extended vocational programs. This would soon be a major issue on its curriculum. Now, as an aside, our recent experience with remote learning has made us realize that when you're serving a community, a school must not only schedule the right courses, but make them accessible. Well, ECC knew that right from its beginning. And here they arranged for a polio victim, Mary Bramer, to participate in a class from her Elgin home. Now, nearly 20 years later, Mary was a remarkable person. I'm sure many of you knew her. 20 years later, Mary would serve as the mistress of ceremonies for ECC's 25th anniversary Founders Gala after graduating from the University of Illinois and starting a successful teaching career here in Elgin. Now, ECC was but a small part of U46 at this time. But U46, to its credit, retained outstanding advice from, or outside advice from outstanding educational and civic resources. And in 1955, for example, the Education Department of the University of Illinois joined a citizens group in analyzing the Elgin schools. And the analysis of ECC fell to a Wayne resident, Gaylord Freeman, who was a graduate of Harvard and Dartmouth and on his way to becoming chairman of the biggest bank in Chicago. And Freeman left a remarkable document, both about the college and the community. But for our purposes, his most important point was the need to separate the college from Elgin High School. He said for the morale of its students and the efficiency of the education, ECC needed to have its own facilities, particularly a library and a full-time college faculty. If you look at that guy, you're probably going to listen to him. It looks like U46 did. But in any event, this was a critical recommendation because perhaps the greatest theme in my father's years of leading ECC was finding the challenge of finding the facilities to handle the college's broad mission and surging enrollments. Now, in 1957, U46 tried to help and asking voters to fund the repair of two buildings, one a funeral home, for an ECC campus, in addition to constructing several other schools. The measure failed 2-1, perhaps thankfully. In any event, in August 1958, Elgin High was absolutely overwhelmed by its own enrollment, and the citizens group said, you got to get ECC out of there. So a month later, U46 purchased a row of old apartment houses along East Chicago Street. You can see the one here, that's the future home of ECC. And a year later, U46 was inviting the community to inspect the renovated building at 373 East Chicago, which included offices and classrooms for ECC and its own library in the basement. Well, on a gray and chilly day in December 1959, I was called from my 5th grade class to meet my mother and taken home quickly to change into a brown suit and bow tie. What was this all about? Well, my mother had just learned that ECC students had asked that their new building be named in honor of my father and that a surprise ceremony was about to take place. So we hurried to the ceremony, followed by a walk over to raise the sign for a classic picture capturing so many of my father's friends and mentors who had made that moment possible. In addition to, if off to the right there, a small figure with a bow tie and a brown suit. But most importantly, though, small though it was, ECC now in Renner Hall had its own home and would be its only permanent facility for over 10 years. Well, as the 1960s arrived, community colleges were the most rapidly growing segment in higher education in America, and ECC was already feeling the squeeze. In 1962, the library moved from Renner Hall to the Masonic Temple. Whoops. Moved to the Masonic Temple. As this Courier article shows, the library was moved by the students down the street, by the way. So it was an involved student body. And then at the same, in those same years, change was coming because my father's longtime partner, at ECC, Kathleen Yeast, was retiring. And in 1963, my father was looking forward to even bigger changes. First was a movement developing in Illinois, a statewide system of community colleges, and my father was part of that movement. And secondly, he was going to have a new partner, Dean Chipman, and together they would work on building the college in a period of unprecedented change.
Okay, hopefully the mic will work this way. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. In 1940, Dean Chipman arrived in Elgin 9 years after Gil Renner came to Elgin High to teach science. He came to Elgin to be the director of the Elgin Academy Art Gallery and faculty for the art, music, and drama programs. If Elgin was a school-conscious city, like you heard Richard talk about, then I believe that Elgin also qualified as an arts-conscious city. Definitely a city that would attract a young man who had a strong background in art, music, and drama, and with degrees in art and art education and 5 years of teaching experience at Monticello College as art faculty. Academy headmaster Leinbach, who would have had his office right in this building, specifically asked him to develop the Academy's relationship with the community and to put the art gallery and the Academy on the cultural map. I believe this mandate to collaborate with the community really shaped Dean's world and career for the rest of his life. In 1940, Elgin had a lot going for it in terms of the arts. There were strong school programs, especially in music. In fact, according to Mike Alft, in 1940, Elgin voters passed a referendum that they had voted down the year before, only after the school board threatened to withhold contracts for music teachers. Pretty unusual. There were established choirs and musical groups going back to the 1800s or 1880s at least that we know of, and a history of community theater. And there were also two organizations that were having a significant impact. They were the Fox Valley Civic Music Association and the Elgin Musicians Club. Dean became active in both of those, and they helped him make connections with people in the arts, education, and business. The Fox Valley Music Association was active in Elgin for over 5 decades between the 1920s to the early 1980s. Many of you probably participated in it. Each year, it provided Elgin with a series of performances by nationally and internationally known artists at a price designed to be affordable for families. The photo and article here are from 1940, the year that the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo performed at the Masonic Temple, if you can imagine. And in November of 1942, none other than pianist and composer Sergei Rachmaninoff, performed at the First Methodist Church. As Dean would tell it, it was one of the most thrilling experiences of his life. He met Rachmaninoff on the day that he came to Elgin to escort him to the church. The church was packed for the performance and the audience was beyond appreciative. Of course, the concertgoers that day had no idea that they were hearing one of Rachmaninoff's last performances, quite possibly one of his last two performances, solo performances. He died only a few months later in March of 1943. Unfortunately, there are no photos of the Elgin performance that we can find. Fox Valley would have subscription campaigns that were organized to engage the community and raise funds to buy the artists, basically. These photos show campaign headquarters from 65 and 67. I wanted some from 50s, but I couldn't find them. The organization would hire only the artists that it could afford based on the money that they raised from the campaign, and thereby they avoided financial risk. Community concerts, you'll see that in the picture here. This was sometimes even, the organization was sometimes even known as community concerts because they were the booking agent and helped with campaigns and provided advice about talent. Dean served on the Fox Valley Music Board in Elgin for over 4 decades, and as president 12 of those years in the 60s and 70s. In later years, I remember when he was at the time when they were trying to figure out what artists to invite, and he'd be surrounded by all these things on his desk, and he'd be having, I think, a lot of fun trying to pick out who to invite for the upcoming season. I think it brought out the impresario in him. The other big club was the Musicians Club, Elgin Musicians Club. And it held spring and fall festivals with proceeds going to scholarships for music students. For the Spring Festival of April 41, these 3 musicians were the trio of conductors for the 3 parts of the program: a 6-piano ensemble, an orchestra, and a chorus, respectively. On the left is Jane Hampton, a pianist and organist, later to become Jane Chipman, my wonderful mother and my father's amazing partner. And on the right is Charlotte Byers, who later became Charlotte Bowl, and she was a vocalist and a choral director. In the middle is Marion Laffey, who has actually a big role with the Elgin Symphony later on. She was a violinist and at this point a Musicians Club orchestra conductor and conductor of the Elgin High Orchestra and a music teacher in the Elgin Public Schools. When I found this article, most of these photos were completely unintelligible, particularly the one of my mother. It was totally black. And I set out to try to figure out how I could rescue the photos. And this is what I came up with. They're not that great, but at least you can see the people. And I think that's a beautiful picture of my mother. It's one I had never seen before. So in the 40s, Dean was creating art and music and drama programs for the academy, and he was also doing programming of all kinds for the community. And he was also supervising the construction of a stage at the art gallery and starting new arts organizations. So in 1946, when the new stage was completed, Dean was quoted as saying, "This addition will greatly increase the usefulness of the art gallery as a school and community center." He also expressed hope that it would help to revive a little theater movement in Elgin. Although small, the Academy stage was well equipped for the time period. The new stage was a big deal because at this point, really the only usable theater spaces were the Masonic Temple and the Elgin High School auditorium, with school gymnasiums and churches filling in the gaps. The Academy stage was used widely for plays, concerts, recitals, and rehearsals for both Academy students and community groups. And the art gallery became known to some as Elgin's concert hall. The Fox Valley Arts Association was formed in 1946 when Dean organized a meeting of 30 artists at the art gallery. They decided to establish this organization to sponsor programs, art classes, lectures, and exhibits at the gallery and in many other locations in the valley. This 1954 photo shows an exhibit that was being hung in the art gallery. On the right, you have Max von Isser, who would later become head of the art department at ECC. In 1947, Dean loved choral music and decided, okay, let's establish an organization that can do big choral works. So in 1947, he founded the Elgin Choral Union with Frank Kratke, a faculty member here at the Academy. Singers were recruited from local churches, and the first performance was held in May of 48. Frank Kratke conducting. Rehearsals were held every Tuesday evening at in the main gallery of the art gallery with the stage at that end. And Dean was manager and secretary for the first 16 years and maintained a close association after that. Heading into the 1950s, the gallery was a hive of activity for sure, and it was also featured in the Chicago Sunday Tribune with highlights of the music and arts programs that were going on. I don't know how well you can see these, but anyway, these were art classes and music classes that were being offered. In 1949, Elgin Community College finally arrived. A civic symphony and a community theater were in the offing as early as 1950 when Gil Renner became dean of the college. The college would provide support to these organizations for years to come. The desire by the college to provide cultural offerings as a community service through the adult education division, and the fact that the leaders of U46 and the college were personally interested in the performing arts, both contributed to the idea of sponsoring the symphony and the theater, and later other arts groups as well. Although we know that there were symphonies at junior colleges in other states, this approach of incubating community arts groups was distinctive and perhaps even unique among the junior colleges of this time in Illinois, and it may still be. In the fall of 1950, Elgin Civic Symphony was launched. Marion Laffey had recruited orchestra members to play at the Musicians Club Fall Festival. Doug Steensland, newly arrived in Elgin for his job as EHS band director, joined this group and was inspired by the experience of playing for the fall event. He saw potential for a permanent community orchestra. There was strong support for the idea and from the administration, and the Elgin Civic Symphony Orchestra was launched under the auspices of ECC. Steensland was named conductor and Marion Laffey was named assistant conductor and concertmaster. Rehearsals began in December of 50. The first full performance took place April 17th of 1951. And this picture is of a rehearsal preparing for that performance. It was a huge success and the symphony was off to the races. By early 52, the symphony had grown to about 60 members and was featured with a full page spread in the Chicago Sunday Tribune. U46 provided rehearsal and performance space as well as instruments and music. Members of the symphony signed up for a course called Civic Symphony, offered through the Adult Education Division. And the orchestra continued to develop with very positive reviews and community support for over 20 years under the guidance of Doug Steensland and Marion Laffey. And of course, the Elgin Symphony still exists today. We'll come back to that later. In 1951, a number of interested individuals, including Rachel Steensland, Robert Patchen, and Eileen McNichol, met to discuss starting a theater group. Patchen, an English teacher at ECC, proposed to teach a theater class in the evening program out of which a play could be produced. The idea was subsequently approved by ECC administration and the class was scheduled. The first productions of The Male Animal by James Thurber were held April 4th and 5th of 1952 at the Ellis Junior High Auditorium, directed by Patchen. Thus, we have the official debut of the Elgin Community Theater. Seen here are Alan Shanks, Dick Witt, Rachel Steensland, Mary Bausch, Harry Durkee, Ed Christensen in rehearsal. From this point onward, the group presented at least 3 full-length productions a year. Some of them are listed here, and it continues on into, I think, even the current time. The second production was Detective Story in the fall of '52. And rehearsing here are Howard Schultz, James Costello, Rachel Steensland, and John Witt. From the theater's founding in '52 until the mid-'60s, it was sponsored and closely associated with ECC. Dean was active in the group in the early years, designing sets for all 3 productions in the '52-'53 season and directing the first play of the '53-'54 season, The Heiress. According to their website, the group still exists today under the name of Elgin Theater Company. So in 1952, there was a publication produced by a group called Friendly Neighbor, Inc., and it was called This Is Elgin. And it really was describing all the reasons why somebody might want to move to Elgin. And there were 2 pages on the cultural aspects of Elgin. In the first page here, it highlights the Musicians Club, the Art Gallery, and the Fox Valley Music Association. And it says, if you like to listen to music or to make it, you need not be a professional to join a group where you can do so. In this other page, it highlights the Choral Union, the Elgin Civic Symphony, and Fox Valley Art Association. It emphasizes that you don't have to be an expert to take advantage of art classes. And even if you don't want to make art, you can attend programs and exhibits at the Academy Art Gallery, sponsored by Fox Valley Art Association. Elgin Community Theater is not listed, you might have noticed. I think they might have just missed the deadline for publication. So by the late '50s, Dean was very well connected in the community and established a network of friends and colleagues at U46, First Methodist Church, and many other groups. An important member of his network was Orrin Thompson. In 1963, when Dean was offered the opportunity to direct the adult education program reporting to Gil Renner, he accepted with great enthusiasm. This role would also include managing the Elgin Symphony and coordinating other cultural programs that the college offered for the community. I know he was thrilled to be working at the college, which he viewed as a major community resource, and both Gil Renner and Orrin Thompson were educational leaders that he held in very high regard. In '63, when he arrived, one of his first tasks was to hire new instructors. This article announces the addition of 12 new faculty for 12 new courses out of a total of 80 credit courses now being offered in the evening program. I was a student at Elgin High at the time, and I often would go to my father's office after school and spend some time there. And I remember that he was enjoying his job, getting to know faculty, talking to people, going out in the community and talking to people, putting together the evening catalog, arranging art exhibits. Everything about his job was in sync with his beliefs and values about the importance of adult education and the arts. In 1964, ECC produced a marketing brochure to explain the goals of the college to both potential students and the community. In the opening article by Orrin Thompson, he declares that the primary purpose of ECC is to provide youth and adults of the area with a center for advanced educational and cultural activities. That message was reiterated in different ways by U46 board chair Ashley Arnold, Gil Renner, and Dean Chipman throughout the rest of the brochure. In Dean's article, he explains that the evening program for the current semester reflects both the growth of the night school and the expanding interests of the community. The evening program really provided all the aspects of a true community college: credit, non-credit, personal growth, you have it. And I remember Dean being very excited about the breadth and depth of the courses offered. Although we may think of him primarily related to cultural offerings because he spent so much of his life doing that, I think it's important also to realize that he was a big advocate of basic education programs, citizenship and veteran-related programs, and also vocational and technical programs. And he was really proud of those courses that were offered at ECC. This last part of the brochure highlighted the community theater, the Civic Symphony, and the newly added travel film series, which the college was now sponsoring. and also has a rare photo of Marion Laffey directing the Elgin Civic Symphony in rehearsal. So when Governor Kerner signed the Illinois Junior College Act of 1965, the wheels were set in motion for massive change at ECC. Richard has referred to this. The fact that this development was coming would not have been a big surprise to Dean because he had been involved in meetings and conferences related to the changes, but he may not have fully realized just how huge the impact would be on his job description. But we will come back to that later after Richard tells you more about the transition to District 509.
Well, in the mid-1960s, my father's job was really evolving. And the mission remained consistent, which was, of course, to build an institution responding to all the adult educational needs of the community. But for the remainder of his career, he would be pursuing that mission essentially through three major tasks. One was building a state system. Secondly, was creating an independent ECC, and finally, build a new campus. And these were strategic and managerial and political responsibilities, which were really kind of far away from his passions for teaching and coaching. But each of them was crucial to finding the resources for the continued success of ECC. Now, from the early 1950s, my father had held leadership positions in state junior college organizations, and he established bonds with other state educational leaders, all of whom were working toward a state system supporting two-year colleges. And their dreams finally started to take off in 1961 when, with the formation of a state board of higher education, which was responsible for creating a master plan for education in Illinois. And study groups prepared analyses for this master plan, and my father was involved in the group that did vocational, technical, and adult education. And a final draft of the master plan was approved in 1964. And then when legislation was being prepared to implement that plan down in Springfield, my father was there as a principal editor doing a rewrite on the proposed bill. All these efforts required frequent day trips to Springfield. And I was no early riser, but I often loved to accompany my father down there. And when I was awake, I enjoyed the ride down Route 66. And then I'd get down to Springfield and I could enjoy the Lincoln sites while my father was working. Now, like many people who accompanied him on these trips, I also looked forward on the way home to a stop at the White's Cafe in Morris for a slice of one of their remarkable pies. This is part of institutional history of ECC that you'll find nowhere else. Well, in July 1965, Governor Kerner signed the Illinois Junior College Act. And I suspect my father was one of the few people truly to understand its background and complexities. And he used his Rotary Club connections here to explain them to the community in August. Now, the significance of the state system to our story is it provided the organizational and financial foundations for ECC to become independent. And organizationally, the new act put community colleges as part of higher education in Illinois rather than like the common schools like U46. And financially, it offered significant incentives to existing colleges to separate from their high school districts. Now, even before Kerner signed the act, Elgin was preparing for an independent ECC, and my father was meeting with the Association of Commerce leaders, educational leaders, and city officials to be prepared. And in May 1965, a Citizens Advisory Council presented an action outline to the U46 board. And there are two key points of this outline were first, that U46 should divest itself of the ECC to a new board. And secondly, the college has got to get to work on finding a campus site and building a new building. A lot of work would take place during the following year, including efforts to persuade the Illinois Board of Higher Education that ECC indeed met the standards for being independent. But in April 1966, the state board granted ECC's application, and the U46 board voted to relinquish control of ECC. Now, in June, after a somewhat spirited election, a new board was elected to govern District 509 of the Illinois Community College system. The 7 members had run as a team, and an outside advisor cited them as a board of unusual quality and with admirable and diversified records of public service. And indeed, that was correct, because they would go on to do an excellent job launching an independent college. Does everybody know who those people are? Yep. Okay, that's great. They should be remembered. Also in June, my father was appointed president of the new college, as noted in this clipping, which came with a congratulatory letter from his friend Chet Alexander, the principal of Elgin High School. Now, negotiations between the college and U46 continued through the summer, unwinding the relationship, because ECC had been deeply embedded in U46's financial and administrative structure. But the process went remarkably well and was essentially complete by September 1st of 1966. Unquestionably, my father's connections in the community, particularly with U46 and with the state system, have been enormously helpful here. But he'd be absolutely the first one to say that this whole process reflected ECC as a true community college, because the community stepped up, showed it wanted this institution, and provided the effort, leadership, and resources to obtain it. And get this. They even established the college's first tax rate without a vote. You see, back in those days, the school code allowed school boards to institute new taxes, then giving citizens a specific time to petition for a referendum on the matter. And using this so-called backdoor referendum, the U46 board implemented the tax, and Elgin allowed it to become, in effect, without a vote. And this tax was an absolute key element in placing the new college district in an excellent financial position. On the other hand, no one was more crucial to the successful divestiture of ECC than U46 Superintendent Orrin Thompson. My father and Orrin had worked closely together since the 1940s, and as the head of U46 and my father's boss, Orrin truly was, in my father's words, ECC's first president. And ECC's new governing board, as one of its first acts, issued a tribute to Orrin, citing his signal and forever unique influence for the good. Now, in 1965, Orrin had announced his retirement effective August 31st, 1966. And in his career, he had directed massive educational change here. But I can't help thinking that his retirement date reflected his desire as one last gift to his community to oversee the successful divestiture of ECC. Now, the standard history of ECC says that once the college achieved its independence, it would experience change on a greater scale than at any other time in its history. And a big part of that change was building a new campus. A separate campus had been discussed as early as 1949, but some experts back then had suggested that the community's educational needs would never be sufficient to support one. Well, by the early 1960s, that clearly was not going to be the case. The college was arranging for temporary facilities all over the area east of downtown, and they even would provide maps to students so that they could find their way around. Nevertheless, a study in 1965 claimed that inadequate facilities were holding back the college's enrollment, accreditation, and curriculum. And in the fall of 1966, the college needed to limit enrollment and prepare more temporary facilities at the YMCA. ECC was Elgin's biggest renter, and in an endless race to match the facilities with the needs. Well, school and civic leaders had been searching for a solution. In the spring of 1965, a fellow named Harry Blizzard chaired a committee seeking an appropriate site. All eyes soon fixed on 229 acres of land, which the state hospital was preparing to release. And the college worked with the city, which obtained the land, and the city sold 100 acres to the college and kept the rest for a golf course. Now you can see a picture of that, that grand open space there in the state hospital land. This is taken looking east from where the campus currently is. That line coming towards you is sort of the early version of Spartan Drive. McLean Avenue runs right across the center of that, and off in the distance is now where Grumpy Goat is, and the golf course and all that sort of thing. But this was all open land back in those days. So you can see what they had to work with. Well, having acquired a site, the college could turn to financing the new facility. And once again, the community stepped up to support the process. Now, using highly sophisticated political marketing techniques, like this slideshow, which helped convince voters that the state junior college system would provide 75% of the funding for a new campus if the community only had to step up and give 25%. Well, they liked the deal. And in February 1967, voters approved a $5 million bond issue, passing it in every precinct and by over 3-1. So they were ready for the building of the campus. The groundbreaking took place on December 24th, 1968. It was a wintry day, but it must have been a warm gift on my father's birthday. You can see them. This was not a situation where they lined up a bunch of fellows in suits with silver shovels for some reason, but this was kind of a muddy, groundbreaking experience here. Well, gradually, the buildings grew on the landscape, and it was a beautiful building when the main central unit opened for classes on September 17th, 1970. Now, I had a summer job that year helping move into the new building. Somebody caught a rough picture of me kind of struggling with a bookcase, trying to help move it up the stairs there. But in any event, I remember the enthusiasm of students and faculty like Jack Galdoni here, plugging in his electronic equipment, who finally could be together in their own building in their own college. It was really a nice experience. Now, the new campus was just one of many changes which were affecting the college, because in those years, ECC's curriculum was being transformed. As I mentioned, during the first 15 years, with few exceptions, they had not offered programs leading to a new occupation. Both the community and the state were demanding a change in this. And the new state system, for example, required that to receive the highest level of funding, a community college would have to have at least 15% of their courses in vocational and technical subjects, which would lead directly to employment after 2 years. Now, my father had served on the master plan committee, assessing VOTEC and adult education, and he knew very well ECC was going to have to do better. And in 1965, EC started out by initiating a new nurses training program, which has been very successful, of course, over the years. And in March 1966, the college arranged for a trip of Elgin business and educational leaders to Ferris State College in Michigan to investigate their 2-year VOTEC programs, which were considered among the most progressive in the nation. And shortly thereafter, ECC started 2-year programs in accounting, data processing, and secretarial training. Now, ECC hired a specific administrator, a very talented gentleman, Don Green, to oversee the VOTEC expansion. But Ann's father would take overall responsibility for ECC's expanding curriculum. And you'll hear from her how he masterfully directed that expansion while building other academic and cultural initiatives. Now, these changes brought a growing enrollment in the faculty and the administration to serve it. And for years, ECC had run on a lean administration, essentially my father, Erica Varick, and the adult education head. And a 1966 report from the Accrediting North Central Association warned that the college was severely understaffed. But they definitely expanded the administration and the faculty, but it really somewhat came as a cost that, as Erica Varick recalled, the expansion sort of sacrificed what she remembered as this culture of closeness, which had existed at ECC for many years. And she certainly herself was an embodiment of that. Well, scarcely weeks after becoming independent, ECC was arranging for residents of District 300 to have their Dundee area system join District 509, and new residents were moving in all the time into the eastern part of the college's district, moving in from Chicago. And Elgin itself was changing. Since the college had been founded only about 15 years before, the community had lost two of its most important economic drivers, the watch factory and the watch case company. An urban renewal had swept through the downtown, and even a young scholar at Elgin High and the college named Mike Alft was detecting a growing inner city. Well, a 1965 study of the schools in Elgin no longer described Elgin as some New England postcard, but as the backyard of Chicago. But at the same time, that same study confirmed that enrolling at ECC is a new way for the community's youth and adults to fulfill the old American dream of getting ahead. Now, through these years, my father's calendars were filled with meetings, trips, presentations, working dinners. Board meetings often lasted after midnight. And it's a tribute to the board members that they would devote this effort after a full day of their own personal business. You can see here adjourned 12:26 a.m. Now, my father often came home late and exhausted, recovering on hot nights with a mixture of 7-Up, ice cream, and chocolate sauce. And he enjoyed taking staff out for meetings out of the office for a Burns malt. And here's the current version of that nutritional profile. Well, by 1968, that lifestyle resulted in a diagnosis of diabetes, and its management, given the technology of the time, was always a constant challenge. Now, to my knowledge, my father was not a fan of Bob Dylan, but he would have appreciated one of Bob's most famous titles, "The Times They Are A-Changin'." In March 1969, Harry Blizzard, fresh from a junior college association meeting, warned the board that it was important to stay in tune with the times, recommending the students be brought into every phase of the matters concerning their education. Well, that was timely advice, because in May 1969, some students picketed outside Renner Hall, protesting the dismissal of a young professor. Now, my father came out to meet them, trying to establish what in those days was called a dialogue, and noting one student's picket sign that Renner is alive and well and living in his office. He asked for the sign so he could show my mother where he was spending his time. On the other hand, other events were challenging the college's close relationship with traditional supporters of the community. And in the spring of 1971, a student group invited the firebrand lawyer Bill Kunstler to speak. And my father saw it as just another opportunity to bring ideas to the community, but others saw it differently. And a longtime community associate publicly warned him that if Kunstler speaks, it's going to take the college 10 years to recover. But as he was in so many endeavors, he had the complete and elegant public support of Board Chair Frida Simon. And in fact, Kunstler spoke, and the biggest problem was parking. Now the board of trustees apparently had a meeting that night, but they adjourned early so that, according to its minutes, some members could attend an activity on campus. And my father was in the midst, however, of accreditation meetings and did not join them, and I still have his ticket. Well, a few weeks later, my father had the privilege of presiding over a more appealing community celebration, the dedication of the new campus on May 2nd, 1971. And it was a brilliant occasion. It was arranged by Ann's father and shaded only by Orrin Thompson's absence due to illness. For my father, the dedication was both the exclamation point and the period to his career. Because 2 days later, on May 4th, he wrote to Frida Simon that the new campus had opened new eras of greatness for ECC, but his approaching mandatory retirement age made it impossible for him to achieve further goals, and he wished to retire by September 1st. His letter also expressed his gratitude for the unusual privilege of being associated with the college from its very beginning. And in June, he presented his graduating class for the last time. And he was recognized with the gift of a tree to the college in his honor and a bright yellow tandem bicycle, which remarkably did get some use. Now, his most meaningful honor came at his last board meeting. The board named the college's new library for him so that, in the words of Frida Simon, he always shall be an integral part of this college so long as it shall exist. Now, my father had been, from childhood, a real reader. And remembering the library's meager origins in the basement of Renner Hall, he was immensely satisfied that his name would be on a new cultural facility open to the community. And later he returned for a ceremony dedicating a bronze plaque designed by one of the campus's architects. The excerpt he wrote for the plaque typically recognized the community for establishing the facilities. For the rest of his life, he retained many connections with the college. One of the most poignant was attending with Orrin Thompson a celebration of Eric at the 1977 commencement. It was the last time the three would be together. Orrin passed away a year later. In 1952, my father had forecast a future when people would be less concerned in education about graduations. And they would realize that education is a never-ending process, and they would look to community colleges for help in well-balanced living. My father was privileged to have had a long life to watch ECC work toward that vision. His last college appearance came in January of 1998. He attended the opening of ECC's satellite facility in Streamwood, enjoying a laugh here with one of his last hires, Carol Ackerman. The facility was described as a partnership of the college, Streamwood, and private industry to bring the college's courses closer to local residents. It was just the sort of thing my father had worked to achieve throughout his career, and a fitting occasion for a farewell. He died 3 months later, in 91.
Hey, you guys need a break? We have one more part. Hey, we're going to rewind now after that beautiful ending back to 1966. This photo, in my mind, symbolizes the transition. It shows Renner, Thompson, and Chipman, still U46, presenting reports to the Illinois Junior College Board for review. And within a couple of months after that, Class 1 status was actually granted to the college and allowed for the official transition from U46 to District 509. We've had a laugh about this photo too, because it kind of looks like Gil Renner is dumping a bunch of stuff on my father's side of the table, but I think they're both putting stuff for that picture. Anyway, there was a reorganization. So in October, Dean Chipman became Dean of Instruction, and department heads were identified who would report to him. And he was now responsible for both the day and evening divisions, all of the credit and non-credit courses. And the college would soon be up for review for the North Central Association, the accrediting body. So there was a lot on his plate. As Richard talked about, there were always lots of consultations with good people, actually. And one of them, two important ones occurred at the end of 66. The one on the left is a consultant named Victor Spothealth of the North Central Association came, and he made a lot of great recommendations for the new era. And rightfully, he emphasized the need for a more robust administrative structure. So Dean also met in that same period of time with specialists on voc tech programs from the Illinois Junior College Board. His name was Albert Martin, and they discussed how he could make the changes that Richard referred to a little earlier for vocational training. To answer the critical needs that we're talking about here, in June, in June, there were new positions that were announced. There was first a director of technical and vocational education, who was Donald Green, and then director of continuing education, Charles Medeiros. And the continuing education piece also included the evening program. This is Medeiros on the left with Dean and Gill when they're looking at a model of the new campus. I think it's kind of an iconic picture, and it's been used a lot in the papers. In 1971, or actually in 72, I guess, a new position was also announced, and that was Director of Community Services. So they were moving in the right direction. During the transition and all the changes that were coming about, the new board was still strongly in support of cultural programs and cultural outreach for the college. And as manager of the symphony in 1967, Dean formed an advisory council to raise money from local contributors and corporations. The Illinois Arts Council had begun to contribute annually, and the college also had increased its financial assistance to the orchestral budget. The symphony was performing progressively more difficult works under the leadership of Doug Steensland and Marion Laffey, with audiences supporting 3 performances a year. This November 17th program focused on works for the pipe organ and therefore was held at the First Methodist Church. Jane Chipman was the organ soloist, and the program cover was designed by Dean Chipman. The family affair, you know. In 1966, Dean had a crazy idea. He proposed to invite Margaret Hillis, director of the world-class Chicago Symphony Chorus, to Elgin for a special choral festival with the Elgin Symphony and the combined choirs from ECC, Elgin High, Larkin High, and a children's chorus. Here's some background. Dean was a huge fan of Miss Hillis and the Chicago Symphony Chorus. Remember that he founded the Elgin Choral Union because he was especially fond of large choral works. Dean also built relationships with the management at the Chicago Symphony that allowed him to connect with Hillis, and she liked the idea. Each participating group would learn the music under their own conductors. Then Hillis would come to Elgin several days prior to the concert and rehearse the groups separately and then together. This approach was not only efficient, but also a way to involve everyone in the learning process. This all came together on February 26, 1967 at Larkin High Gymnasium with a capacity audience of 1,500 to hear a 300-voice chorus and the Elgin Civic Symphony. What an amazing opportunity for those who participated and those who attended. The performance was sponsored by ECC and financed as well, partly by the Illinois Arts Council. And these beautiful photos of the rehearsal are from the ECC yearbook. Unfortunately, we have not located any photos of the actual concert. A second choral festival was held in March of 1969. Hillis returned to do a second one with the combined choirs, with the Elgin Symphony, of course, and the combined choirs now of ECC, Judson College, Elgin High, Larkin High, and the members of Elgin Choral Union. The choral festivals of 67 and 69 provided an introduction from Ms. Hillis to Elgin. Dean was extremely proud of his work to make Hammond's Auditorium a reality and to help foster its development over the years. In the early planning stages, as a concerned citizen, he had served on a committee to champion the idea of a performance hall to be built with the funds bequeathed by Hillis in 57. After years of discussion and planning, work finally began on a new civic center for Elgin that would include Hammond's as its crown jewel. An architect from Elgin, Charles Kaltenbach, was chosen, and groundbreaking took place on June 3rd, 1967, 10 years after Hattie Hammond's death. Construction began, and I'm certain that Dean and Gil and the board discussed ideas for potential ways that ECC could partner with the city of Elgin regarding the support and use of Hemmons. Remember that Elgin still did not have a professional level theater that could accommodate larger audiences, even with the new campus. Yet in yet another example of distinctive cultural leadership, ECC offered to sponsor the opening event at Hemmons for the purpose of raising funds to purchase needed stage equipment and a concert grand piano. Without the equipment and the piano, the use of the stage would have to be delayed. The board asked Dean to be the general chairman of the gala opening. A planning committee was formed, and Ferranti and Teicher, a popular piano duo of the time, were chosen as the artists. Robert Hoffer, longtime supporter of the Elgin Symphony and ECC board member, generously subsidized the artist fees. Invitations went out, and a marketing campaign advertised the event to the community, creating more interest, and the opening of Hemmons was a major event of the season. This is what the building looked like the night of the gala opening, October 9th, 1969. Inside, there were speeches, ECC music groups performed, and Ferranti and Teicher brought down the house. 1,100 concert goers gathered to celebrate and attend a reception in the lobby following the concert. And there was a lot to celebrate. The stage equipment and Steinway grand piano were purchased and delivered. And in exactly 1 month later, November 9th of 69, the Elgin Symphony Orchestra played their first concert at Hemmons. The ESO finally had a home, and Dean was ecstatic. This photo shows David Nelson preparing to use the new piano for a concert of the Elgin Symphony in April of 1970. He looks very happy there too. Dean remained involved with Hemmons for the next decade and was a member of the Hemmons Advisory Council. He played many roles: mentor to city staff members at Hemmons, advisor on how Hemmons could be used for public events, and sponsor of art exhibits and gifts of art for the building. For those of you that have been to Hemmons, do you know what hangs from the ceiling of the lobby? A big mobile sculpture designed by Max von Nisser, and it was donated to the city by the Union National Bank and Trust Company and installed in 1979. So this is how it looks today in the lobby. And this is Max on the day they were installing it in 1979. The next time you go, check it out if you haven't noticed it before. It's very high up, so sometimes you might not see it. Plans for a spring fine arts festival in 1970 were announced in November of 69, and headlining the festival was the New York-based Murray Lewis Dance Company. A variety of other cultural events for both students and the community were held during the months of March and April at different locations around the city: Hemmons, Gale Borden Library, other venues, and the cost was free or minimal. The Murray Lewis event also had a few interesting add-ons. Prior to the evening dance performance, Murray Lewis taught a master class for the area, high school and college students. The 90-minute class was followed by a lecture on dance by Ann Barzell, a noted dance critic and performing arts coordinator of the Illinois Arts Council. And my father and Ann Barzell worked a lot together. You're hearing Illinois Arts Council all the time. They were a great supporter of ECC. Students attending the afternoon workshop were also able to watch the company rehearse in the evening for the evening performance. So that was another really nice addition. In the Courier News, board chairman Frida Simon called the festival a very exciting development for our educational and community service programs. A second Spring Arts Festival was held the next year, April and May of 71, and this time it was headlined by the Dance Theater of Harlem, an up-and-coming New York company founded in 1969 that still exists today. These photos are from the master class given by Arthur Mitchell, founder of the Dance Theater of Harlem and principal dancer at the New York City Ballet. The company was founded in 69 and it still exists, as I said. It has a huge positive impact. It's had a huge impact on the dance world. And again, this was with the support of the Illinois Arts Council. In 1971, this was also a year of change for the Elgin Symphony Orchestra. Doug Steensland retired and Margaret Hillis accepted the position of music director. Hillis was now able to bring her talents to the symphony and to the college music faculty in a part-time role. She had been impressed with many things about Elgin: the talented and motivated amateur musicians she had worked with on her previous visits, the college's support of the symphony as a community service, the beauty of the architecture of the new campus, and now Hemmons Auditorium, a brand new performance space with great acoustics. After her arrival, the ECC Board of Trustees provided appropriations to allow for the expansion of the orchestra's activities, including rehearsals and performances. And this marked a new era of growth for the symphony. Hillis was music director until 1985. Dean knew when Margaret Hillis agreed to come to Elgin that it would be a great thing for the college and for the symphony. At that time, I'm not sure he fully realized the positive impact her appointment would have beyond Elgin, to the world of classical music and the history of women who are professional musicians in the field of conducting. A new book about Hillis, which has recently come out and is also over there in an exhibit, talks about all the barriers that she had to overcome, her pioneering attitude and spirit, and her many contributions to the field of choral music and conducting. And Elgin Symphony is definitely a part of that story. Richard already mentioned two extremely important milestone events that occurred in 1971, the new campus dedication and his father's announcement of his retirement. I can say that this picture, obviously, if you can see it, is Gil is talking to the group at the dedication, and then shortly after that, he announced his retirement. It probably came to as a shock to a lot of people, but especially to Dean Chipman. And Dean would work under a new president, Dr. Robert Apple, for the next 2 years. This is another picture of Gil giving out diplomas at his last graduation ceremony before he would retire. And you can see Mrs. Simon and Dean Chipman are clapping. The next big thing in 1971 was a Fox Valley Music Association bonus performance. You'll see here that they were, this list is the first 6 things on it are the normal performances that they were sponsoring for that year. But then there was a bonus performance that was co-sponsored by ECC and Fox Valley. And this is the program for that. Dean had dreamed about bringing the CSO to Elgin, and now with Hemmons, that dream had become a reality. Unfortunately, a few days before the concert, he was admitted to the hospital with a back problem. I think it was a slipped disc, but there was no way he was going to miss this event. So he was in traction, as far as I know, at the hospital. I wasn't around here at the time, but anyway, he managed to convince the doctors that he could leave the hospital in an ambulance, attend the concert in a wheelchair, and go back to the hospital. And he did. And I have this vision in my mind of if he couldn't have convinced the doctors, I could see him kind of running out of the hospital in his hospital gown, but he would not have missed this. In 1973, Dean had reached mandatory retirement age of 65. His last day of VP of instruction was August 31st, 1973, almost exactly 10 years from the day that he had come to ECC in 1963. At the request of Frida Simon, board chair, and President Apple, he stayed associated with the college as a special consultant and manager of the symphony until 1980. In the 70s, Dean's focus became building the music department at the college to help support the symphony. In 74, he hired Bob Hansen as music faculty and to assist Hillis with her rehearsals. In 1977, he hired Dan Mackey as music faculty and assistant manager of the symphony. And in 1985, upon the resignation of Margaret Hillis, Bob Hansen was made music director of the symphony and remained in that position until 2011. Dean also helped influence the decision in 1978 to bring the Elgin Choral Union, now the Master Chorale, under the auspices of the college as an in-residence ensemble, continuing the legacy of the college acting as an incubator for arts organizations. And currently there are 5 in-residence ensembles that have been with the college for 15 years or more, listed on the slide there. In June of 1980, Dean resigned from his ESO role and other ECC-related projects. In learning of his retirement, Margaret Hillis wrote to say, "It is with great sadness that I learned you are resigning your position as manager. I want to thank you for all of the excellent advice and guidance that you have given to me and the staff of the Elgin Symphony during the time you have been manager. The orchestra's growth has been in no small part due to your efforts. May I call on you in the future for general artistic advice? Your knowledge of the community and the musical activities there is invaluable." At the October 26, 1980 ESO concert, both Dean and Jane were honored by the college for their work in support of the symphony. And Frida Simon was a longtime supporter of Dean, and he greatly admired her and respected her leadership on the board. Mrs. Simon spoke for the college to honor Dean with these words. "Today we say thank you to Dean primarily for 1973 to the present, but with Dean, time and place boundaries do not apply in traditional fashion. Dean's influence for good, his enrichment to our lives ripple out and on over the years and through our mobile generation over the country as well." In 1994, Dean was honored to be invited to the dedication of the Visual and Performing Arts Center. He was absolutely thrilled with the building. I was on a tour with him when he saw it, and he was speechless. He loved the design, the classrooms, and the new performance spaces. On this day, President Heath surprised him by talking about his contributions to the arts, which was not something he had expected. Dean was deeply touched by the words of Dr. Heath that day, and they were about his work to advance the arts and how that had influenced the building of the Arts Center. Dean died in October of 1995. If he were here with us today, he would be very happy that the college still has strong commitment to the arts. And he also would be deeply honored that the circular drive in front of the Arts Center bears his name, Chipman Circle. Dean often remarked about what a wonderful gift it had been to be part of the administrative team at ECC and to work with Gil Renner. He had an immense respect for Gil, and I know the respect was mutual.
That's fine.
Yeah. Okay. That is the end of our program. Thank you for being attentive for so long. And we can throw it open for questions or comments or anything if you would like. Yes.
I just have one comment, and it was posted by former President Mike Shirley on one of our retiree Facebook pages. And he says, Mr. Renner asked Superintendent of Schools, "Are we dreaming big enough when they walk over the site that would become ECC campus?" I think he dreamed big enough.
Yeah. I see another hand. Yeah.
Do you know what the first performance of Hillis was, the choral work? Was that the Bishop of Renner?
Well, that was the first choral festival thing that they did. Yeah. Then the second choral festival was King David. Yes. And then after that, when she came to be music director, I don't know which choral things were done first. Yeah.
This has just been an absolutely fabulous presentation. Thank you both for doing it.
You're very welcome. It was a long, we worked on this a long time and it was really a great experience and we're glad to have so many people to
We
share.
timed it out. We were sure it was an hour. We kept working.
Well, it was.
We're glad.
So great.
Hey, on the Zoom.
Yeah.
And, Bob Acker says, of course, the main theater in the Visual and Performing Arts Building, now Building H, is named after Harry.
Absolutely.
Can you repeat that so that?
Okay.
So can you-
Yes, we don't want to forget this, but my father would also be very happy to know, because he wouldn't have known at the time that he died, that the theater in VPAC has the name of his good friends, Harry and Phyllis Blizzard. Yeah. And Harry was supporter of everything great in Elgin. So, yeah.
Well, why don't we bring this formal part to a close? It was a great presentation. I'm sure Richard and Ann will stay around for some questions, personal questions. Nobody's allowed to leave until more of the treats are eaten. So help yourselves.